Well, welcome. This is Trying Days Roundtable 15. The marriage of world peace and economic justice will create heaven on earth. I am Bruce the Taurus. I moderate these roundtables, which were inspired by the book in 2 volumes, The Valediction, by husband and wife co-authors Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould. They've developed a plan for world peace that can be found at valediction.net. That's valediction.net. Click World Peace on the top banner. Paul and Liz have some things to tell us, and then we want everyone to participate in this discussion about how to make peace the foundation for life on this planet. But first, our host, Chris Milligan.
Well, thanks all for coming and for being. You know, it's a wild world down here, and this is a couple of days before Christmas, but it's also 12/21. It is the solstice. And, you know, we have cycles, and they're very much a part of us and a very much of what is going on. And, you know, one thing that's happening right now, too, is in this cycle of generations, we're really creating a new world, okay? With the internet and with the personal computer, there are things that are happening that we couldn't even have dreamed of happening in the 1950s, you know? So and with this brings hope and possibilities, okay, to change how people are walking down here, especially the people that are taking advantage of other people. Okay, because, you know, again, we've got a gentleman here. He shows us how we live on this little ball in space. And I don't know if people saw the message from Captain Kirk, where, you know, he went out in space and he said wasn't anything like he experienced on the Enterprise. He went and looked at it and he says, gosh, he looked out in space and it seemed dead. And then he looked back down at our little planet and it impressed him so much that he says, you know, we have to save this planet. I mean, it's so fragile out there. And so onward to a better future. And that's what we're trying to do. But it's not going to be just us that makes a change. It's going to be everybody. And there's lots of different people looking at lots of different things. And so, you know, support your fellow man, treat your Mother Earth nice, and treat your brothers and sisters as your brothers and sisters. Onwards. That's all I have to say today.
Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Paul and Liz.
Well, we're going to start this off by viewing Laura Flanders' interview with Peter Linebaugh. He is the author of the Magna Carta Manifesto. The interview was done in 2015, the 800-year anniversary of the signing of the Magna Carta. Linebaugh discusses parts of the Magna Carta that most people have never heard of and need to know about. It's regarding the commons, a term used to describe shared resources from nature in which all stakeholders have an equal interest. The word evolved from the English legal term for common land. Linebaugh explains how the signing of the Magna Carta accelerated the inability of the people to access the commons as they had for millennia. The running time is about 17 minutes. Chris?
Well, we don't often look back 800 years on this program, but today we will, and here's why. 800 years ago, following a revolt by the English nobility, King John put his seal on the Magna Carta, or Great Charter, a peace treaty of sorts, the traces of which can be found in our law today. The charter guaranteed that the king would respect feudal rights and privileges, uphold the freedom of the church, and maintain the nation's laws. It became the basis of what we call habeas corpus, the right not to be detained arbitrarily. But the Magna Carta established more than that. It also established the rights of the commons, the right of landless, common people to use public, even sometimes privately held land for shared benefit. Our next guest is the historian on this topic. What happened to the commons part of the Magna Carta? What happened to our commons? And if we were to update the Great Charter, whose power would people want to rein in today? Peter Linebaugh is Professor Emeritus at the University of Toledo and the author of many books, including the Magna Carta Manifesto and most recently, Stop Thief, the Commons, Enclosures and Resistance. Peter, welcome to the program. Glad to have you.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So take us back 12, 15. What was life like back then? And does it matter?
Well, it does matter now. I mean, because fossil fuels at that time was not oil, nor was it coal. It was the woods. It was the forest. It was, we could call it the rainforest if you wanted. But at that time, it was the woodlands or the forest. And England had recently been invaded, it felt, by the Normans coming over from France. They themselves were Scandinavian. They spoke another language. And they also brought with them different creatures, such as deer and I think some types of rabbit, but I'm not quite sure. Anyway, they wanted to claim all the forest lands, and they wanted to claim also to run their deer, basically for great feasting and for hunting and to show their prowess as hunters. So that's one important theme. But the other big theme, I think, besides the different fossil fuel regime, is the formation of the state, of a centralized monarchy. And who is going to rule this? Is it going to be a secular authority like the kings, derived from, of course, the Normans? Or is it going to be not a temporal authority, but an ecclesiastical or church authority? So this is a conflict at the very time that the Mediterranean is opening up as a realm of commodity trade. So we won't say globalization, but we could say something like that.
I'm hearing a bunch of parallels.
Yes, okay. So this is the conflict going on throughout Europe. And it has to do with the commodity. It has to do with producing things for a market, producing things for trade, and of course for profit.
Now, just to distinguish commodity markets, commodity economy from what preceded it, what was the difference?
Subsistence, production for use, production for your neighbors, production for your village. At that time, it was local. They went local. No jet travel, of course, no high-speed trains, and even to go on horseback was really the sign of the nobility, of the aristocracy. The rest of us went on foot.
So pick up the story with the commodities.
Yes, yeah. Well, it has to do with the cities. The cities grow. You have the first bourgeoisie, we say, around the bourse, around the marketplace. And they are struggling with these people on the horses, the nobility. Here is your class conflict, we could say. All right. And this is a traditional and well-known story. And part of the Magna Carta is protecting what they call the freedoms of the city, or the corporation, as they would say, which is a place of traders. It's also, this is very essential for us too, it was also a time when Jews were a transnational. Remember, there are no nations or states yet. They're being formed. Jews had played a special role in this. We mentioned 1215, the date of the Magna Carta. 1215 is also the date of the Lateran Council, when Jews have to wear a special sign, okay, because they're associated with the commodity trade. Perhaps I'm throwing too many things into the pot at once. Let's get back to Magna Carta and to a little place on the River Thames, Runnymede, in what shall we say, June 15th, 1215.
Because a lot of people say this was the first time the power of the people reigned in the power, well, of the powerful, the power of the even more powerful, in this case, the king.
Okay, now
Is that fair?
I personally think it's fair, and I will fight for that, footnote by
I
footnote.
probably got it from you.
No, you get that. That is the old story. That's the Whig story. Then along comes not the neocons, but the conservatives who say, oh no, this was a deal. You don't really understand. Freedom at that time meant privileges for the nobility or the bourgeoisie. But they were fighting a war. And their horses consumed a huge amount for dinner. And the people who produced that dinner was the peasantry. And the people who did the fighting were the peasantry.
Yeah.
So the people did play a role. But both your nobility and your bourgeoisie in the history of Magna Carta want you to forget that.
Yeah. I also want you to forget the other part of the treaty that had to do with forests. Can you talk about that?
One of my faults as a historian is I love dates. And the date we have for the Magna Carta is the 15th of June, 1215, which the British people would rather have Poles Show as a national holiday rather than the Queen's birthday. But here in New York, everyone remembers the 11th of September. Now, the 11th of September is when the Charter of the Forest was recovered in 1217.
So 2 years later.
So there's two charters. This is why we say the Big Charter or Magna Carta, which actually is only like that.
Okay.
All right. And then the Charter of the Forest, which is smaller. Throughout the centuries, they're called the Charters of British Liberty.
Uh-huh.
There's two of them. But when they came over to America, the English colonists only brought one of them. Why? Because they wanted the woods in America. And the people who had the woods in America were people who already lived in America.
Indigenous people.
Exactly. Indigenous people who were wondering, why are these white people coming from England? And they said amongst themselves, it must be they ran out of wood.
Which, to be fair, they seemed as if they did.
They did indeed. They did indeed.
All those boats going to and fro.
Exactly.
So, but the Forest Charter was threatening because of what it guaranteed. And we talked a little bit about what people were doing before they got into commodities trading. But as I understand it from your work, what it guaranteed was the right to gather nuts, fruits and berries, graze your animals, even plant some things on what was called common land, which sometimes was owned by someone, but was shared in common, used to benefit everybody. That was what was in that charter, right?
Yes, that's right. Particular uses, even in the Magna Carta. You look at Magna Carta 69 or 67 chapters. The 7th chapter gives the widows' estovers in the forest.
Estovers being
wood taken for the purpose of building or the purpose of replacing a rake handle, for tools, for thatching, for constructing your house, and most important, for fuel.
So for personal consumption, things you might need, subsistence, survival, you couldn't necessarily make it factory, but you could use the logs you'd find in the forest for your own preservation.
In every location, there's no law, but there's customary practices,
Right.
known in oral rather than written authority. And the keepers of the oral authority are the elders.
So your books that talk about the claiming of the commons, the dispossession of the commoners, the most recent collection has as its title, Stop Thief.
Yes,
That has to do with the resistance to all of this.
it
Talk
does.
about what that struggle was about, what it meant no longer to be able to go and have your right of the forest and your estovers.
In Chiapas, Mexico, when they crank up the chainsaw, they're tearing down the forest and they're tearing down the subsistence for the people who live there today, who must go then look for a job. This is the origin of the job. This is the origin of what we used to say, the proletariat.
Right.
Where you could not live, you could not have dinner on the table or make your rent unless you were willing to have a job, and you could not have a job unless that job produced profit for your employer. The regime of the commons makes it possible to live without oppression or exploitation. Therefore, you don't attack the
Chris, could you pause for a second?
indirectly with that boom, chainsaw.
But chains and whips and incarceration, prisons and cops, the process of getting people off the commons wasn't pretty.
A fellow said it was written in letters of blood and fire.
Yeah.
And in the case of England, it took centuries.
I was
To
going
get
to say,
people
how
off the
long did it
land.
take?
In the case of Scotland, somewhat less, perhaps 2 centuries. In the case of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, a generation or 2.
And who resisted and how?
It has to do with a total realm, a total basis of what kind of human beings we want to be. And so there are many who will resist, who haven't directly been expropriated, but can see that it's coming.
There were organized expressions of it.
Yes,
the levelers,
the diggers,
the diggers
the ranters.
planted things in
But-
protest.
Yeah, I can tell you what, peas, turnips, carrots,
What would they do?
root crops, the diggers, they would go and dig up the hedges that were making private property. The levelers would go and level the fences that were making private property. Now, hold it. I don't hang on to your checkbooks, everybody. I'm not threatening your own property. It's property that is used as capital, as we say. It's used as a, quote, resource for exploitation of others.
Would you want to go back though
Mhm.
to that pre-enclosure era? I mean, as you said, people say the land became more productive after
Mhm.
that. We fed more people. Life was perhaps less grueling. We didn't work all the time with the harvests. Perhaps it's a better life for women, for gays and lesbians. Help me out here. But
I
do you
can
want to
help
go
you
back
out.
to a golden age? Was it a golden age?
It's, the golden age is an aristocratic figment from Roman times. I'm talking about something real. I'm talking about, you mentioned women. Women are at the center of the commons. Women, because even today, especially, so today, expropriation means attack on women. This is why such scholars as Andrea Smith or others, or Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, will stress the violence against women as a process of conquest, because the first step in conquest is to destroy the culture, where culture means the possibility of reproduction of human society. And this is why regimes of the commons, and here I mentioned Jeanette Neeson, a tremendous professor at the University of Toronto, former colleague of mine at University of Warwick. She wrote The Commoners, and she showed how you could talk and gossip and gab, whilst gardening, whilst working in the forest, with the cow, with the pannage for the pig. So it's we're talking of a community that is through the commons. We're not talking about division between human life and resources. Rather, we're talking about a mixture. Do I personally want to go back? Of course. I would love to go back. I think human happiness ended at a certain point with the birth of capitalism. I really do. I really do. I'm not talking about living forever. I think that's a blasphemous goal. I'm talking about what do we want in life? What do we want as human beings?
If you were going to be crafting a Magna Carta today, or even a little Carta, or maybe two charters, who would you be reining in? What would you put in those documents? It's probably not the king or queen anymore.
No, we have to refer to the 1% who must learn to common or to share, or if they don't, they must be commoned. That is, they must, if they're not willing to be active in the solution to the problems they represent, then they must be taught that by severer measures. Yes, so when I say the 1%, what I basically mean is the rule of money socially. I also particularly mean the ruling classes of every continent. This is closely associated with patriarchal forms of property bequeathment, of violence, of adults against children, men against women. So these are structures which the 1% through the ages have built up and are not going to be rooted out easily, but it's our task and our duty, I think, in thinking of the Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest, these two charters of liberty, to begin again.
Where does the slogan "Stop Thief" come from?
The Wobblies. Wobblies. Stop thief, you shout, and everybody says, okay, I'll stop the thief. And that way you get their attention. You get people's attention, and then you can enter into your spiel about the 1% and the 99%, which actually people know. What we need to know now is how to get out of this.
Yeah. There's so much good stuff in your books, Peter, and a lot of it should be commoned in the curriculum. But one thing in particular sticks with me, and that's your poem about the goose, or your poem. But can you tell it to us?
You know, not only will I tell it to you, I will tell you a story about it.
Even better.
The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but lets the greater villain loose who steals the common from the goose. The importance of this is so that we see who the villain is, and that we understand that the prison and the commons go together. That's the importance of it.
Peter Linebaugh, we could talk to you forever. I love it. Stop Thief, The Commons, Enclosures and Resistance. We'll put a link to this book and all of Peter's other books at our website. Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome, Ronna. Thank you.
Okay, here we go. So now that you have a sense of how we lost the commons, we're now going to start presenting some of the ways in which we can gain the commons back. And this will start with an overview of the philosophy of Henry George, which can be summed up as equal rights for all and special privileges for none, by promoting the rights of everyone to share in nature's gifts. The science of economy that George created can be easily understood, not just by economists, but by everyday people. This is the best way to guarantee that unjust economies cannot be foisted on the public again. George's economic analysis showed that land values, which are due to natural and social processes, should become the source of public revenue, and taxes on labor and industry should be eliminated. Properly understood, George's economies will become a guide for achieving justice and sustainable prosperity for all. George's 1879 book titled Progress, Poverty was a groundbreaking treatise on the relationship between industrialization and poverty. It was one of the best-selling books in the late 19th century America. It showed that many owners of land do nothing to contribute to production, yet they collect an income from the land, or they even can allow the land not to be used in order to wait for higher returns. When good land is held out of use, labor must resort to less productive sites. The rents rise at the expense of wages, creating unemployment. Chronic boom and bust cycles follow. The solution George proposed was the public appropriation of the land rent. This would return to the people the values that society and the earth have created. It would remove the tendency for valuable sites to be held out of use. More land would become available, lowering rents and prices, allowing producers to keep more of what they produce. The land value tax does not penalize those who work and produce as it does now. Known as the incentive tax, it rewards those who make improvements and provide employment. And since public services increase site values, it is a self-financing alternative to taxation. These ideas were widespread by the end of the 19th century, and that is when the game Monopoly was originally designed to teach George's economics. It was identical to today's Monopoly, except that the players could switch to the George's rules, and when they did, nobody ever lost. So to summarize what we've been talking about, the first step in building peace as the platform of life is recognizing first that the earth does belong to all of us. The wide activation of the George's principles will aid our goal in creating world peace by dramatically reducing the struggles over territory and resources that tend to trigger wars. It offers ways to achieve equal access to nature that ultimately will lead to cooperation and peace. And I just wanted you to know that this information is actually readily available on the George's website. There is far more on there, so if you're interested, you should consider checking that out. And now I want to go on to our next level of what we intend to promote and how we intend to really promote these ideas. We're developing basically what I would call a PR plan to get the news out about this. And we have decided that the kickoff campaign will focus on King Charles for this reason. As the head of the Windsor family, he is the largest landowner in the world today. And to get the world's attention, we've decided that we'd like to write a public letter to King Charles explaining why it is necessary he acknowledged that the loss of the commons triggered by the Magna Carta must be reversed and shared with the people again. The letter will be signed by Ilana Herzog for many good reasons. And Ilana, thank you so much for being Ilana. Not only is Ilana respected worldwide as an expert in the Georgist philosophy, an experienced advisor on how to activate and shift to the land value tax, Ilana happened to have been born on November 14th, 1948, the birth date, the same birth date, day and year of King Charles. And this synchronicity adds a mystical quality to the letter that we intend to exploit to the hilt. We'll also include educational materials to help everyone who we want to get this to grasp that the solution that we are promoting will, in fact, create heaven on earth. This is not just a metaphor. We'll get the message out, especially to the British people, so that they will try to encourage their king to do the right thing for all the people of the Commonwealth and the world. We'll contact journalists, possibly such as Laura Flanders, who I thought did such an incredible interview, for interviews, possibly talking to economists, possibly Michael Hudson, for analysis, and others too. We'll get but we do need to get the campaign ready to go public as soon as possible for a very specific reason. The Queen's death on September 8th created an interregnum. This is a very powerful spiritual opening that will be closed 9 months later with the coronation of King Charles on May 6th. We need to fill that opening with our message. This is a message that we feel should be delivered to the gods that these people are aligned with before the coronation. We also would like to add that we have now got a third date to combine with the first two and for the interregnum. A little over 1 month after the coronation of King Charles happens to be the 60th anniversary of JFK's American University speech, which is the spiritual foundation of our world peace campaign. So what I'd like to do now is read you what now is really a draft letter, just to give you an idea of how we're trying to approach this and how we're trying to get this idea out to the world, because we're really looking for all of you to, trigger new ideas and help us really make this happen. Your Majesty, as a child in the 1950s, I was made aware of a very special connection I had with you when my mother told me that my birth date, November 14th, 1948, was the same as yours. Just like your mom, it turned out that my mom was in labor too. She emphasized one point that day I never forgot when she said, quote, "We were both giving birth, so why was the Queen getting all the attention?" I loved my mother's message, and although I agreed with her, I really wasn't sure what to make of this fact throughout my life. Well, that all changed when I was asked to represent an alliance of Georgist organizations promoting land tax reform worldwide as a new way to create economic justice and peace for all. It's based on the theories of the 19th century economist Henry George that defined land as possessing natural values that all people should share equally. Since those values are not man-made, they become the primary source for raising public revenue. Already activated in many parts of the world, it has a proven record for achieving economic justice and sustainable prosperity that benefits all. When I realized that you were the largest landowner in the world, I began to grasp the potential of our birth synchronicity and knew just what to do. Ask for your help in spreading the word. Everybody knows it's time for a great transformation in our world, and you can be the visionary royal to lead the way. Once you have a deeper understanding of how this solution can be put into practice, I know you will want to help us make this planet a true heaven on earth for everyone, including you. And that's the end of the letter as it's framed now, which we will be, of course, this is, as I said, a draft. And in addition, what we will be adding is the appropriate educational materials so that people can begin to really see that it is absolutely true that once you really understand this form of economy, you will never go back. I mean, it is so straightforward and so understandable. So now we're all ready for everyone to jump in with whatever ideas you might have. We're looking for, okay, Chris.
Well, I wanted to talk about Ian Waite here because he's actually a British man. Okay. And he's a author of business handbooks. Okay. And is working very hard on a series of 3 books that basically tell the business people, you know, you really ought to be ethical.
Good luck. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
Ian, I'd like you to talk a little bit about what you've heard.
Thank you, Chris. Look, I don't want to be a picky Brit going over our history, but I got several important things to say about the historian's presentation. One, I was totally astonished. The reason I was totally astonished was he spoke about 2 issues stemming from Magna Carta, and actually there are 3. The 3rd issue, the one he neglected, and funnily enough, the one that would make his case and the case for your friends, is 1295. Because in 1295, Magna Carta was effectively overturned. It was rewritten, and the monarchy drew back unto itself a lot of the power which the nobles had taken from it. Under the 1215 version of Magna Carta, the nobles were in the position of forming a council to restrain the king and effectively to set up an oligarchy of greater substance. Now, that was overturned by the monarchy in 1295, and the actual way in which government developed stems from 1295, not from 1215. 1215 is actually a convenient myth. All anyone needs to do is just check the facts. And I'm afraid your guy, distinguished historian, obviously that he was, failed on that very important point. The other thing is that he had a completely romantic view of medieval England. Let me just put these things to you. Would you have enjoyed trial by ordeal?
No.
Would you, for example, have willingly gone along with a judicial system whereby you were publicly burned, the belief being that so powerful was God that your burns would be miraculously healed in a very short time if you were innocent. If, however, your burns lasted, you were obviously guilty. The same thing would happen on drowning. Would you have enjoyed being thrown into the pond, and if you sank, you were innocent? Because the power of the Lord was such that you would be revived magically. Now, come on, guys. That was the way of life of ordinary people. It's a completely different thing to talk about the commons and commonwealth and he referred to the golden age as going back to Roman times. Again, that's complete nonsense. It goes back to Greek times an awful lot earlier, and there's a wonderful myth. That's when food was free and so forth. Now, to shift the ground, as Chris was saying, I have devoted a great deal of time to pointing out the whole history of business whereby ethical behavior actually brought good profit. And you can take that track from one of the villains of modern society, Charles Koch. If you look at Koch's books, actually, he advocates a notion of good profit. Never mind what he'd done in the past with the environment and all the rest of it. And I'm not being a Charlie Koch fan, but I am saying that he does institute an ethical approach to parts of his management, right? He's now to choose somebody so far on the right to illustrate this issue does show the basic value of what Thomas Aquinas was saying back in the 13th, 14th century about good profit being allowable from business, what Muhammad said, where he revolutionized a view of business in the Arab world because he dignified the making of good, decent, fair profit as the proper duty of a Muslim. And the point is, deal fairly with your fellow men, make a profit by all means, but do it fairly.
Our real focus is really on the economic philosophy of the Georgists. What I really was trying to do is just help people get a sense of the reality that there was a relationship that the average person had to the commons, and that actually was taken away. Building our case kind of to get to today, to the Georgist philosophy of solving the problem of that very issue of where to get the taxes from.
Yeah, you wanted Alana to speak up to this, right?
Yeah, thanks. 2 quick points to what Ian just said. He said, it should trace back to 1295. That's the importance when the monarchy once again gained power over what would have been the oligarchy of the barons. They're both the 1%, as I see it. We're talking about the 1%, the few that own most of the land and resources, and the wealth as a whole of the planet. So while technically that can be a difference, 1215, 1295, I think for our point about power and land, we have to see that the nobles and the aristocracy, if it switches back and forth, it's still the 1%. Then you mentioned these trial by ordeal, public burnings and the drownings. The whole narrative you put forth is, in my understanding, is the narrative of the Inquisitions. And that comes from a very corrupted church. The first 300 years after Christ, Christians were, and the pacifist Christians, they were all pacifists. They were very much tortured and killed until they kept coming until Rome said, okay, Christianity will be the official religion of Rome, about 325, Council of Nicaea and those other councils. But you know what? Christianity then lost its Judeo-Christian economic justice ethic of koina, the koinonia. The commons belong to everyone as God's gift for the autarkeia, for the self-sufficient livelihood of all. So Christians then became part of the war machine. And as Bishop Tutu said years ago, when the Europeans came to Africa, we had the land, they had the Bible. We bowed our head to pray. When we opened our eyes, we had the Bible and they had the land. Same thing with all colonization all over the world. And the exploitation of labor coming from the enclosure of the commons traced worldwide. Kenya, when the British came to Kenya, they forced the Africans off the most fertile land. The Africans were on the margin, but they still were subsistence, able to survive. And so the British implemented a tax, a poll tax that could only be paid in cash. And in order to pay it by cash, you had to have a job. So you trace the exploitation of labor and production, you're always going to trace it back to this land problem, which is what we're relating to the importance of economic justice as pre-district. Now, this is where we're getting off the left and right continuum that has us so in boxes and disempowered as a people. It's the pre-distributive justice means you have the factors set up fairly, land, labor, capital, the relationship of people to planet, so that there's not going to be this gross wealth distribution, which the left and the right keep fighting over.
What I said about medieval judicial practice, that predates the Spanish Inquisition by a good 400 years. That was about competition between religions under pressure. Where Catholics were under pressure from more Protestants, they burned Protestant witches, and the reverse was done.
As much as I would love to take you, Ian and Alana, away on a vacation and ask you questions, may I propose what I've heard is, but previously, Ian, you were curious as to how these Georgist tactics could possibly be applied today. And Alana, I invite you to speak to that. It might satisfy to virgin ears like mine. How can it work today?
And let me say that we're talking about Henry George, okay, from America in the late 1800s.
And Henry George, sometimes called the prophet of San Francisco, because that's where his great realization and his great work, Progress and Poverty, was written. He was a prophetic voice for a perennial wisdom teaching that we've traced back thousands of years, back to the Vedas, back to even pre-Leviticus and Leviticus. When civilizations fairly share the land and resources, they are harmonic and even have a balance of gender powers. When they don't, and then they have the emergence of land grabbing and usury, where money is not just facilitating trade, but it becomes exploitative, then you have the kind of degradations and social inequalities that we see in our time. So he rediscovered this wisdom teaching and brought it forward. If you want to go back to the original Judeo-Christian ethic, I recommend Charles Avela's book called Ownership, Early Christian Teachings. It's brilliant, it's very important. So I'm going to give you one example and then another one, but the first one is not even coming out directly of the Henry George movement. This came out of a governor of Alaska who saw that the oil companies were going to go in and grab a lot of the oil resources. This was about 40, 50 years ago. Now, Alaska being one of our two most recent states to become a state in the United States, has a state charter that says the resources of the state are a commons. It belongs to the people in common. So they realized they had to capture quite a bit of the unearned income, what we call the land rent or the resource rent of the commons of the oil. So the corporations were going to have to pay a high amount to get access, as high as possible. So this was decided upon through, I believe, auctions. The Alaska Permanent Fund was created, and the Alaska Permanent Fund 2 years later created the Alaska Permanent Fund Dividend. Now, every October since then, each citizen resident for 1 year has received a direct payment representing a share of their oil wealth. This year, in fact, was the very highest ever. So in October, every resident of Alaska received over $3,000. Family of four, $13,000. That's significant additional income as a citizen dividends. So this is what Thomas Paine and others early on advocated, that a fund be created from the commons rent that would serve the people. So now there's numerous cities around the world and countries, but I'm in Pennsylvania, so I'll just talk a little bit about this. We're starting the reform towards the commons rent by a change in the property tax. So this is not disruptive. It's not a big revolutionary thing. It is a simple step in the direction we want to go. We say the property tax is two taxes. One is it's your tax on your house, and the other is a tax on the value of your location. We're also saying that what you worked for is your private property, what you labor upon. If you're growing your vegetables, they're yours. But it's not fair that if you have a huge, giant Bill Gates sized vegetable garden, he has more agricultural land than anyone in the country now. It's never going to be fair if a few own most of the land. You're never going to have a fair trade or a free trade system. But we want to stop taxing production. House is production. Take the property tax off your house and then shift it. So it's the same amount tax collected, but a wholly different way. We shifted on to land value. Land value only. Insert commons rent. Why commons rent? The phrase means the land value is created by we, the people who live in a location, the public services in the location, the libraries, the schools, the roads. When there's improvements of these public infrastructures, the land values increase. But we're taxing labor and production to pay for these improvements. And at the same time, since we don't collect this land value tax commons rent, we open the land to hoarding and speculation and abuse. So it's very important in thinking about the market that land not be treated as a speculative market commodity, which is very much in our day. So a market works when you can improve supply to meet demand. There is no land making machine. It's a limited gift of nature.
And Alana, the quick question, well, Liz, I just saw your hand, Liz.
Yeah, I really did want to, enter one fact into this discussion. So I hope everyone can tie in and realize that the ultimate goal of these roundtables is really how do we get to world peace? Where is it going to come from? And what I have become convinced of is that these ideas about economic justice and how they can correct the imbalances that produce most of the crisis that results in wars effectively, or most people willing to support wars, okay, is their belief that they have to have access to certain things. They have to have access to land and resources. So when you have something that powerful that can really, for most people, the majority of people, completely remove that motivational level, we feel that that is the basis on which we can take the idea of world peace and give it, I think, an actual earthly foundation. So that is the idea. We're trying to live, and that's why we call this event the marriage of world peace and economic justice will produce heaven on earth. That's our goal. And I wanted everyone to put that into your thinking. That was the whole idea about taking King Charles and trying to see how we can exploit this incredible opportunity to make public, not so much that we really are going to get his direct attention. We're not saying that, but what we have is an opportunity to educate people to the reality of this, and whatever, I think many of the stories that Alana is touching on are part of the evidence of how successfully this has already been activated and how quickly it can resolve so many of the issues that most of us have always been convinced are going to be impossible to solve at this point. So I did want to put that in everyone's mind as they think about how to contribute to this conversation.
Forgive me, first of all, I'm going to start off with something very academic, but then I'm going to come to something very practical. The academic is this. There's a French economist philosopher called Thomas Piketty, who several years ago came out with the explanation for the imbalance of society and the creation, if you like, of the 1%. He pointed out an economic truth, that where the return on capital is greater than the return on growth, you will have a societal imbalance and you will have an increase of inequality. That's academically proven. Name Piketty, you can check it out. Now, Piketty has got some solutions to that, and they're all crackpot and idiotic, but his original research was brilliant. Now, one of the effects of, well, how did the 1% imbalance get created? A little bit of history. Back in 1945, at the end of the World War II, FDR had created a system in America whereby the people coming back from the war benefited from the GI Bill. And the GI Bill gave training and gave all sorts of economic advantages and incentives to that generation. They were the people who enjoyed the great post-war boom in America, which started to fall apart by the end of the 1960s. It fell apart for two reasons. One was a McKinsey employee called Patton published a list of remuneration of CEOs. And that started the race at the top for more and more money because they all competed to get the most money. They're forgetting the point of were they any good at their jobs? That wasn't the point. They went running to get more money. That was balanced by two academics called Jensen and Meckling. And Jensen, God help us, ended up at Harvard, who was famous or infamous for his course where he was going to, wait, just get your heads around this, you could have valueless values. And he lectured to business students on the creation of valueless values. Now, what Jensen and Meckling did was to destroy the notion of the joint stock company. They did that by insisting with Milton Friedman and others of the Chicago School that there had to be a priority in business for shareholder value. Everything else, they argued, was irrelevant. What that did was progressively to destroy the social function of not just American business, but business throughout the world. That's how you get your 1% inequality. Let me now give you my answer to that. Broadly, the cooperative movement. And that's one of the things which my own institution is looking at promulgating and helping to spread as the alternative form of business relationship. And this is what I offer back as a practical solution. The answer is companies like Ocean Spray. The answer is in the credit unions of North America, who were the only ones who did not suffer after the 2008 crash. They were the only financial institutions that did well. And if you're writing to Charles, I suggest that is what you are asking for support for, and you're asking for royal patronage. Get royal patronage for the creation of cooperative business.
Monopoly capital grew out of the land problem. If you look at Carnegie and Rockefeller, and the money problem, if you look at it, Rothschild, it's a land and money problem that created the 1%. And there's no way you're going to understand this commons rent in 5 minutes. I didn't understand it in 5 minutes. I needed to take a course. But I do understand cooperatives, and I do know that commons rent will facilitate the breakdown of monopoly capitalism and thus facilitate worker ownership in cooperatives. It's absolutely clear to me. So my example, with a moderate shift just in a property tax system in the capital city of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, and by the way, Penn's Woods, Pennsylvania, was not a woods that was captured by the aristocrats, but rather made for the common people who were being exploited in Europe. That's why we have all these Mennonites and all the plain people in the state of Pennsylvania, and people still in horse and buggies over here that I can see every few weeks. Okay, so Harrisburg was the second most distressed city in the United States in the late 1970s on the federal distressed city criteria. Only East St. Louis was worse than the city of Harrisburg. So they were desperate to find something new. And often when it's really broken, you try to find a way to fix it. Hence, they're listening to the importance of tax structuring. So over the years, they kept shifting their tax base off the houses. City of 50,000, they had 4,000 boarded up buildings and a lot of homeless people downtown. They started shifting their tax off of the houses, off the buildings, onto the land site value only. So if you're a land speculator, an absentee landlord, letting your building go to rot, now you're going to be paying more because the property tax is going to be based on your land value. Fast forward very rapidly, Harrisburg had less than 400 boarded up buildings. It was starting to win environmental awards. It was becoming an important city for business investments. The fire rate, arson rate dropped, the criminal rate dropped, and newspaper stories, and I read them, were saying, how is Mayor Reed doing this? There's sound public finance, and at the same time, more public services, and the homeowners are saying this is a really good deal for them.
Joyce, you've got your hand up. Please unmute yourself.
This is not as erudite as all of you, and just very basic relating to what Liz said about the marriage and the foundation for all this is I think it's important that the populace be educated that wars are really resource wars for oil, mostly for oil, but whatever, and that we disguise it, our government disguises it and cloaks it into for democracy or to get rid of a bad blah, blah, blah. But I mean, it's just every war that's practically been fought.
I think
Wendell.
Wendell is next.
What I wanted to say, the thing that I got out of decades of involvement with studying the Georgist economics was the fact that there is a distinction to be made between unearned income and earned income. So the question is, where do you get unearned income? Well, what is unearned income? The definition of unearned income to the ordinary person is that you get to pocket an economic value in the modern era in dollars and cents that you didn't create. If you build a house, if you labor gets paid for it, the effort that it expends, that's 100% earned. And ownership of land gives you, per se, if you don't have a house on it, you're not doing anything. It's just vacant land. You haven't paid money for it as an investment because its value going to go up, having nothing to do with what you've done. The return of increased land rents, or the profit that you might gather at the end of holding it for a long time, that's 100% unearned. And people will look at me and say, what the heck? I paid for the land. I deserve to profit from it. It's an investment. It's a legal investment. Yes. The answer to that for me, I discovered over the years, somebody suggested it to me. Another full-on example of an economy that was based on 100% unearned income was chattel slavery. And this is why people went after it. If you don't have to work to create the value, and you can expect other people, like slaves, that you have the right to own, like you would own a backhoe or a chainsaw. This is a good investment to own. That's what capital really is. And slaves were considered capital because they weren't real, they weren't human, and you could expect a return from their effort. Turns out we said no over 100 years ago in this country. No, we don't go with that. I don't think it was fought on the basis that it was unjust, economically unjust. It was fought on the basis that this is not right to do this to humans and allow it to happen. It wasn't. But the economic piece of it is, why would the Brits or why would imperialists go to every other land in the world and grab it and grab the resources and take the land? Because what they're getting out of it is an unearned income. The right of private ownership of any man-made thing like land, the entire creation, including all the oil in the ground, all the minerals in the ground, including the electromagnetic spectrum, by the way. This is not created by the people who own it, but they have the right to collect the value of it. And where did this value come from? This is where for me, describes where the economic injustice comes from, is that your private ownership of things like, that you didn't create, that you didn't, nobody creates land, and no owners of land and natural resources actually create their value. Where does the value come from? Comes from the fact that the rest of humanity needs to have access to the land in order to survive.
Introducing myself, my name is András Maros, and I said it in my native way. I was born in Budapest, Hungary, literally to the bombs as my mother was attempting to give me birth. So I call myself a born peacenik. And this was April 30, 1944, by the way. So I ended up growing up under Stalin communism and was a witness to the revolution of 1956. And all my education was basically outside of school. I mean, I have degrees, but what the real education was about paying attention to what is going on, not only in your own backyard, but being aware of all the living things around you. And I say all living things. As I was learning what people were doing and seeing all these different economic systems at play, it's not about looking at the things that didn't work. It's coming to the discussion of how to make things work. So my view of what peace is and what world peace is you can introduce all these different, there's thousands of groups like us, you know, right here around the world that are talking and are trying to figure out. So, but how do we get ourselves together? How do we bring the knowledge that we have worldwide? We're talking about world peace. This remains the question. How does that get done? And back about 35 years ago is when I started my first nonprofit, and it was called Artists for Peace. We have an organization called peaceproduction.org. Back years ago, I was working on an idea of acquiring an aircraft carrier and turn it into a peace boat.
I want to thank you for all that you still could share, but as the moderator, I do want to do a sweep of anyone else who hasn't had a chance to contribute or to ask any questions.
Bruce, I haven't said much in this discussion, but I just want to remind you and Chris and everyone else here that we got involved in this issue back in the 1970s. And actually earlier than that, I was in Hare. I was on stage every night preaching to people who were looking to our songs and our awareness as a reason for hope about the future. And then after a few years, we saw that hope kind of shuttled off to one side, and we had some manipulations in Congress where they made the all-volunteer army, and the main reason why people didn't want the war because their children were being drafted and sent to Vietnam was dissipated and went away. And then it all changed. And then suddenly all the people who were in the army were serious about it, and they didn't want any dissenters inside of it. So once again, the system reacted to it. A few years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, Brzezinski came out and said, the public is becoming aware. What are we going to do? As he was speaking before a very elite audience, he said, they're very political too, and they're all well-educated. What, my God, are we going to do in order to avert a disaster for our ruling elites? Well, we've had a very interesting few years now. We've gone from one crisis to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, but it's all simply focused in on the economics of it. We went to Afghanistan to see whether the official narrative that was coming out of Washington and CBS News and the Washington Post was in any way close to what the truth was supposed to be. We went to Afghanistan and discovered it was not fabricated. The Russians were there, the Soviets were there, but the reasons for it were completely the opposite of what was being presented as the main agenda. The Russians, the Soviets, were not looking to control the world, and they were not driving for Middle East oil, our Middle East oil, as we were told. They were simply defending their southern border. The same thing is happening now in Ukraine, of course. We have a similar kind of immense propaganda machine that just kicks into gear. And once again, I've got a 1978 copy of Newsweek magazine on my desk, and the articles that in there could almost be rewritten to be the same problems that we had in 1978 we have today. So once again, the basics have to be addressed. People have to stop saying, well, if only we did that, then maybe it would all get better. The ground that the Georges come from, I'm convinced, and Liz is convinced, and the things that Ilana and Wendell are saying about this movement that was done is so simple and so basic. It just shifts the burden of responsibility to the people who have the responsibility to take care of it, instead of shifting it onto the population of the planet that is completely and constantly distracted by arguments, academic arguments, philosophical arguments, and nothing ever changes. It goes right back. We're right back to where we were in 1978 and 1979. And I really think it's time we just, as they said, as Wendell mentioned, the circular firing squad isn't going to work anymore. Okay, there are other people that want to get rid of us. Yes. So I don't think we have to deal with each other that way.
Paul, I'm as excited to begin to learn all this because I feel it's actionable at the local grassroots level, which is
me too.
Finally, it's something real tangible that could have big, wide respects while the overwhelming problems are just absolutely paralyzing.
We welcome all these discussions, but we do have an operational plan that I laid out to try to get everybody realizing that this is really, you know, back in the early 1920s, Edward Bernays is the one who created public relations, and it was set up to basically con the American people into becoming mindless consumers, and that was its purpose. Well, we would like to use the power of Edward Bernays for the people's purpose this time. And all we're looking for from you is, in addition to all these different angles, is to directly look at our goal, which is to spread the word of how powerful a possibility is that we can affect change with something that people can actually understand. And there's enough proof out there for people to see it really works. Now, I'm sure there are many other efforts, but this one is one that, you know, we feel is a foundation that we can start with. And everyone else whose ideas are welcome to join in. But we do need that marketing campaign, and we need some real help in getting the word out through the media system.
Liz or Alana or Wendell, tell us, please, a website where people can learn about Henry George's economics.
There's several. I'm administrator. This is one of the oldest organizations dating back to the 20s. The International Union for Land Value Taxation, the IU.org. We have a number of videos on there. We have a small grants project for implementation. We have projects, the one that I started in Baltimore, then we have one in Indonesia and the Philippines and in Nigeria. And we're going to keep funding to get all these implementation projects going worldwide. We have the expertise to know exactly the strategy and how to make the strategy work for wherever you live.
THEIU.org. Now, the best I can come up with is my mama, and that's not your name, Peace Production. But you had a finger up real quick. What do you got for us?
It's Mayana, M-A-Y-A-N-A. Thank you. I just want to say that, you know, as we're talking about circular firing squads and whatnot, that the most important thing to do is peace in our hearts and coming together in our hearts with the single intention of the greater good of all, that that effort and breathing together, breathing the same air, the healing of our own bodies will bring us into a field, a consciousness field that will allow us to harmonize together.
Amen. This is a round table, okay? And everybody brings something to the table, okay? And, you know, anything just sharpens our understandings of things. And you know, I don't think there's just one solution. I think there's a multitude of solutions that we can all work together. And, you know, let's take the minute of silence for peace that is going on all around the world. Okay, so let's just be quiet for 1 minute. A minute's a long time, isn't it? You know, and again, I really appreciate us all coming together and talking and looking for a solution. And economic justice is very much something that has to be brought about. And the comment earlier about, you know, Alaska's constitution wasn't written until the 1950s. There was more awareness. If our Constitution was written today, I mean, it's a very nice document, and I enjoy it. And I enjoy the movement of history, you know, being not ruled by royals, not being ruled by popes, but trying to be ruled by ourselves. Because what else is there? You get together and talk about it and have discussion, and hopefully through discussion, we can find solutions instead of saying, hey, you do what I want, you do what I want, you do what I want, you know? And so discussion is good. Amen. Onward.
Thank you, everybody.
Happy
Happy
Happy holy days of
Happy
winter.
holidays to everyone.
Happy holidays.
Yeah.